All right, we're back here on a late Wednesday night edition of the Chase Most Podcast, the full ride here on the Chase Most Podcast with fellow University of North Georgia alumni, Matt Green. Matt, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, sir. It is good to be back again, talking ball as we do. Just ready for college football season, man.
We're getting closer and closer, 51 days as folks are listening to this on a Thursday. And, it's not far at all. It's not far at all at all. You and I, we saw each other in person this weekend, much to the chagrin of my father, who will be listening to this portion of the whole episode of the pod, but very upset that he couldn't see you over the weekend. But then we went to go see you. So it was one of those things where, it like life works out like that. We got the dog involved. No Zeus and Maddox, so I couldn't do a checkup on the knee and see how Zeus is progressing on that front. But by all accounts, in great shape and great spirits. You got the dog cam going, so you can always see what they're up to. But it was a fun brunch.
It was good stuff, man. I'm glad I got to see you. Disappointed didn't get to see your pops, though. That's always like to meet a fan, a very loyal listener to the pod. But we'll have to see him. Let's set that up at some point. But man, it was good seeing you. Apparently, you never done mimosas and at brunch before. Just gonna pour the champagne straight into the orange juice like an amateur. I don't know what that move was, but I caught you before you made an irreversible mistake.
Two things. One, the fiance also was out here just like over the top, not the bubble situation was not a part of her pouring situation.
That's true.
Remember, that was a thing. But also, I was under the impression that we all got our own little cups, and I did not realize, because I thought when he was passing around, I did not pay that close attention, but I thought there were orange juice glasses for each person at the table. So I was pouring my individual one in there. I did not realize that there was one cup until you astutely made a note of it and stopped a disaster from taking place.
I was all over it, sir.
But it was fun. And the food was good. Those were some of the best potato wedges I've had in a really long time. We were talking about that for a while. It was like really good food.
It's excellent.
Really good food. So it was a lot of fun. Tori and I think Samantha, they hit it off. There was a lot of crossover. It was fun. It was a good conversation, good vibe. So I was glad that it all went well.
Without a doubt. She's way too cool for you. So well done, sir.
Everyone is. Hey, you got to outkick your coverage. Both of us outkicked our coverage, and that's just how you got to do it. That is the way you do it. 51 days until college football, and you picked, Matt Green, someone that Georgia fans have no love for. No love.
Is this a surprise?
Because I didn't think you would pick a Florida Gator if you could help it.
I did. So I was going, racking my brain, doing the research that I can. Hard research to come up with this. But a few candidates I came up with. John Vilma, middle linebacker on one of the greatest college football, maybe the greatest college football team of all time, the 2001 Miami Hurricanes. Also still a legend, still in the college football world. Pat Fitzgerald was 51 back in, I think, 95, I think was the year he graduated. So that was Pat Fitzgerald was a candidate, but you are correct. I went a little more modern here in our era of college football, if you will. I was never a fan of him as a player, but game recognized game, right? Brandon Spikes, number 51. Dude was just a baller. 3-time first-team All-SEC, 2-time consensus All-American. I think 2008 Florida, even though they did have a loss, for my money, that's one of the greatest teams in college football history. Like, just absurd the group of playmakers that they had around Tebow. And for all of Tebow's faults, if the way we were going to use him was short passes and fullback powers up the middle, boom, like that was your guy. They knew how to use him for sure. But yeah, I remember Brandon Spikes. One of my worst memories as a college football fan, I'll say, 2008 Georgia, Florida. I don't know if this one sticks out to you. I think everyone knows about 2007 Georgia, Florida. Georgia rushed the field on the first touchdown. Gator stomp, I think, as they called it. Urban Meyer wrote a book that off season. Didn't forget it. Like, I think they did 188 sets of like everything the entire off season because of no Sean Marino's 188 rushing yards he had on Florida the year before. So Florida had circled this game with Georgia all season long. The story I've heard secondhand from Florida fans is that Brandon Spikes was walking around downtown Gainesville all week, just telling anyone who would listen, first time I see no Sean, like I'm lighting him up, basically. Like I'm putting him on his back, whatever he would say, however Brandon Spikes would say it.
Mm-hmm.
And then sure enough, and then if you remember 2008, it's remember as such an awful season for Georgia fans. Preseason number 1 and everything. Lost Alabama in the blackout. But going into the Florida game, I think Florida's number 3. Georgia's like number 5, like both like 7-1, 8-1, like national game of the week and everything. First play of the game, no Sean up the middle. Brandon Spikes meets him, just pops him, right? Just drives him backwards, lays on him for like 5 seconds. Who knows? Shouting obscenities in his face. Who knows what he said to him? And me and my brother just looked at each other right then and there, like we're about to get smashed. And I can't remember, selective memory. I don't know the exact score of that game, but I think it was something like 49-10. And Georgia absolutely got smashed by the team that would go on to win the national championship. So not a fond memory of mine, but Brandon Spikes, he was a dude. Four defensive touchdowns in his last 2 years in college too. So he was just a playmaker all around.
I mean, if you're going to get smashed, you want to get smashed by the eventual champion, right? Like that's the way to go. So it doesn't hurt as much.
Without a doubt. And honestly, this is one of the things that kind of opened my eyes. I remember at the time to like defensive stats, because around this time, Rennie Curran was still at Georgia and just racking up like 130, 140 tackles. And I'm just thinking like, this guy's not getting any love. You know, he's like leading the SEC in tackles, that sort of thing, being the biased Georgia fan that I was. But you look at Brandon Spikes, 131 tackles as a sophomore. Like that's on a team that went 9-4, you know, giving up a lot of points. And then as the team gets better, then he has 93 tackles. And then as a senior, he's got 68 tackles. Because when you're truly playing elite defense, your guys get off the field. And like you saw that with Georgia this past year, like Nakobe Dean, best linebacker in the country, had like 70 tackles on the year because it was just elite defensive play and you get your guys off the field. It wasn't when Georgia had Marlo Herrera and Ramik Wilson leading the SEC in tackles. I think they were both 1-2 one year. It's like, it's not a good thing to have the top 2 tackle leaders in the conference on your team. That's not a good sign for your defense.
Spikes also was one of the cooler looking players, right? He had the visor, which you and I are both proponents of, but he also had, I remember the gloves. Like Spikes had the gloves that were just super cool to me, where they felt like it was just different for him and he stood out as a linebacker, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I feel like they were the first team that started rocking like colored gloves.
Yes.
Because there was that era from like, I don't know, 97 to like, I guess like 2007, 2008, where everyone had to wear gray gloves. So was there some combination of gray gloves in college football? But yeah, I do remember him being like the first guy that would rock like orange gloves or something like that. But yeah, he was a baller. I think he's the kind of guy that everyone wants in the middle of their defense, just setting the tone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he was a player. Surprised it did not work out for him long term in the NFL. He was with the Patriots for a cup of coffee, but he really didn't stick for a long period of time. But I think the Rennie Curran issue was that he was a Brookwood kid, and this is a Parkview situation. So I think if he had been in the right district in high school, maybe more love comes his way, because I mean, just there's that Parkview.
That could be it.
That Parkview situation there.
That's going to be a thing for Georgia. The last thing I'll say, for a while, like Rennie Curran left after his junior year. Like, I don't even know, was he a 4th round, 5th round? Like, no disrespect to Rennie Curran or anything, but it's like Brandon Spikes was All-American, like the best defensive player in the country. This guy comes back for his senior year. We're just like, what's going on? How are there players that are better than ours coming back for their senior year?
Yeah, I have no memory of Rennie Curran in the NFL. Now I'm like curious to see who even got drafted.
I know he was drafted by the Titans. I'm pretty sure he's drafted, but yeah, I mean, he was, for a guy who left early, he was not picked very high. I don't know exactly where he went, but I mean, what was he, like 5'9", 220, 230? He was a bowling ball. He could tackle though. He could.
The one that hurt was Jarvis Jones, right? Like he was just so much fun in college, and it was just the injuries and everything else. You're like, this dude, man, he was fun to watch, and it was just he just couldn't stay healthy at the pros. He kind of had that David Pollock thing going where it was just like he was such a monster at Georgia and just became the personification of that defense for a couple of years and a fan favorite. And then just injury prevented him from really becoming a NFL all-timer. It's kind of sad because Jarvis and Pollock were both just wrecking balls and just unblockable on the edge.
Yeah, for sure. Jarvis Jones is definitely a fan favorite. I think he beat David Pollock's single season sack record. Basically single-handedly beat Florida in 2011 and 2012. I think he had like 8 sacks in those 2 games. But yeah, Jarvis Jones was a beast. And I mean, and he had the whole neck thing injury for why he got medically disqualified at USC. The only reason he even ended up at Georgia.
I didn't even realize there was a crossover in the kind of injuries that they had. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that either.
Because the 2 neck things.
I don't know what his injury was in the pros, but
I'm not sure either. But he like went to the pros and like there was just the medical red flags when he was going, and there were question marks of how it's going to work. But I don't know. Shout out to Jarvis Jones on a great college career. David Pollock too. Both pretty awesome back in the day. 44 next week. I'm excited about because I'm trying to think of who pops for 44.
I feel like the first thing I think of is all the Syracuse guys. They what do they have? 3 different ones that were like legendary.
That's interesting.
Number 44, but I don't know. We'll have to rack my brain. Any 51s? Tennessee 51s come to mind?
Not really. Like there's a 45 for AJ Johnson, and I'm trying to think for 40.
Oh yeah, met him in downtown Knoxville one time.
Did you? AJ Johnson?
The one time I went to Knoxville, saw Georgia, Tennessee. I actually met him downtown.
Okay.
He was I feel like he seemed very impressed that a group of Georgia fans like knew who he was. It was like he's like, oh, this guy plays for Tennessee. I was like, Gainesville High School, bro. I definitely recognize you. He was like, he looked like he was kind of blown away by it.
And he was like, yeah, red elephants. Let's go.
Yes, let's go.
And you were like, hey, one day I'll be a Tequila Falcon.
Like, you should have gone to Georgia, man. What do you do with this orange? You don't want this. This is what you want.
All right, that's enough. SEC presidents may want to stay at 16 teams. Matt Green, this came out this week in Saturday Down South. Matt Hayes wrote about this and talking to some sources. I think one particular president said that they are good at 16. But then I had Andy Staples on yesterday and talking about where things were going. And Staples made the point where it's like, yeah, they're saying that now because the SEC is not making the next move, is essentially what they're saying. It's like, we're good at 16 if no one else does anything. So that's kind of where the SEC is at, is that like, we'll make a lot of money if we just stick with Texas and Oklahoma. We're fine sticking with that. Like, we're good. We're going to get in the playoff. We have the brands we want. We have the TV contract that we want. We're okay. There's no rush or interest in adding Oregon and Washington just for the sake of adding, or whoever it is. Like, they're fine, which is interesting because that does make sense. And it also speaks to the fact that they have no interest, it seems like, in diving into the ACC mess with ESPN and the ACC network and the grant of rights and stuff like that, where it's like, no, we can just wait that one out for 10 years. We're going to make a bunch of money for the next 10 years with or without the premier brands in the ACC. And they're already on ESPN and they can find their own deal or whatever with the Pac-12 and all that kind of stuff. But like, ultimately, we could just get them in 10 years. The Clemsons, the Florida States, or whoever. There's no rush. Like, we're okay. But if Notre Dame joins a conference, and talking to Andy and where he's heard and what, like, talking to other people, it seems like the only way for Notre Dame to join a conference is if the playoff is, the format's changed, where the governing body decides, hey, only teams that play in a conference can qualify to compete in the playoff. And then they're like, all right, we'll jump in. But that's the only way, is like they have to mandate it in the college football playoff committee that this is the new rule. When we expand, Notre Dame cannot, or any independent team cannot make the college football playoff without being in a conference. So that would change a lot. And obviously they would go to the Big Ten if that were the case. They're not going to go to the ACC, even though they've been playing an ACC schedule and across all other sports they're doing that. That won't be the case. But I do wonder what happens, because Andy thinks that what happens first is they figure out the playoff before the leagues are settled, the league alignment is settled, which is interesting because if you throw in a playoff expansion and then it's like, all right, well, we can't, like, how do you figure out who gets the guaranteed bids into the playoff if the leagues aren't settled? So there's still a lot more of a mess awaiting college football, I feel like, than a lot of folks anticipate, but it does feel like everyone is kind of waiting on, like, basically nothing's going to change until the college football playoff is expanded and new wrenches are thrown into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I just like what is really going to cause Notre Dame to really join a conference? Like, do you think that they're like,
well, it's the playoff, right? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's literally, they tell them you cannot compete in the playoff without it.
No, but if they're going to change the playoff, it's likely going to go to an 8-team playoff, right?
I would say
Like
12 to 16.
12 to see, I just don't know about that. That's a lot, but it's possible. But if you're increasing that many teams, I don't know why you would then mandate a conference championship, or being like just participation in a conference is like I don't know why once you go to 8, it seems like 8 now makes it easier to not require a conference champion, right? If we go to like 4 super conferences and we want 4 conference champions, then yeah, you like have to join a conference to be involved in that. But that's not where it's going to go, right? And obviously the SEC wouldn't sign on for that because they're getting 2 teams in with the 14 playoff right now. But I feel like there's, I mean, it's hard to say there's not going to be anything before the playoff contract expires. Like, that's after the 2025 season, I believe. Mm-hmm. So we have 4 more seasons.
Well, no, they can change it now. Like, that's the whole thing, is they can go back into the room and change it now.
They can change the playoff before 2025.
Like, they can, yeah, they can go in. Yes. Basically, like, it seems like they can do whatever they want to do. Like, it's just money is no, like, they can do whatever. That's when it's technically next up for debate. But if they want to go in there and meet and change this, they can do that.
I think the only thing, I don't think the playoff is ever going to strong arm Notre Dame in joining a conference. I think the only thing that could stop Notre Dame, or that could make Notre Dame join a conference, is the other teams maybe just don't schedule Notre Dame as much. Like, if Notre Dame is dependent on some of these, Power 5 games or whatever we're calling those conferences at that point, if they're just not routinely getting those games as much as they once were, like, that might be enough to get them in a conference. And I don't know if everyone collectively is going to do something like that, because they obviously have those built-in rivalries with USC. Like, Michigan, it's not an every year thing, but it's a lot of year type thing. So, like, I wonder if we get to more just these super conferences and maybe everyone's playing 9-10 conference games, if then you'll just see these other super conferences want to play the other super conferences. Maybe they get some sort of, contractual, like how the NFL does their schedule, where this is the year the NFC South plays the AFC East or something like that, and all the games line up. Like, if we see in the future, okay, everyone's playing 9 conference games and we have 3 other Power 5 conferences, Power 4 conferences, well, now you have 1 Pac-12 game, 1 Big 12 game, 1 ACC game just automatically on your schedule. Like, I think that's the only way that Notre Dame is really like pushed into joining a conference, because I don't think the playoff is going to keep them out. Like, there's no reason to keep them out, really.
Well, I think it's just more of like the uniformity, where you want, like, it's better television, so the TV, like, the Big Ten wants them in there, and it's better TV games. Like, they play a tough schedule. Like, I think Notre Dame gets discounted for the kind of schedule they play each and every year, but I think it's just more of like the TV revenue. Notre Dame, Michigan, Notre Dame, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Notre Dame, who insert team here, USC, obviously. I think it's just more of that uniformity where they're in there, and it just, the Big Ten gets a lot more money, and I think the Notre Dame would make a lot more money in that scenario if they go into the Big Ten, and the Big Ten TV rights deal is gigantic and inflated even more with the kind of brand that Notre Dame would bring in. They would have a lot of leverage, and they would get a good deal. And I mean, they would make a fortune moving into the Big Ten if they were to do that. I don't
And
know.
I hope they eventually do, because they're such a Big Ten team. I feel like in 2022, it just seems like
Wait,
we
hold on.
should
When
be
you think of the
past.
Atlantic Coast, you don't think of South Bend, Indiana?
No, not quite. It's a little removed from the Atlantic Coast, but
Well, who goes in with them? Because it's an odd number if Notre Dame goes in by themselves. Like, that's
see,
something we
that's a
don't talk
good.
about enough. Someone has to go in with them.
That is a good point, and it's like I wish they would just trade. Like, no one wants Rutgers in this conference, right? No one. Maybe Maryland. Maybe this is how Maryland gets out. Like, Maryland never wanted to join to begin with, but obviously it was a financial thing to begin with them. But I wish,
Maybe you
like,
send in Boston College. That'd be interesting. Throw them in there, the Boston market. I don't
yeah,
know.
you could throw in Boston College for sure. Yeah, because I feel like you do have to. You can't have an odd number of teams. Like, I mean, granted, the Big Ten had 11 for the
That's true.
longest time, right?
I
So
don't like it though. You can't
they
have
could do.
odd number divisions and conferences. I don't like it.
If they find a cool way to sneak it in the logo, then I'm cool with it. But no, I just it would be awesome if they could just keep it at 16 and really do what I said and put Maryland back in the ACC or something like that. Like, because the ACC would be struggling to get up to 16. Like, Maryland would help them. Like, I don't know who they go with after. Like, that would be 15, right? Like, what do you go, Memphis or something? Like,
Well, I
I
think
don't know.
Memphis
So
is going to the Big 12. Like, it seems like the Big 12 is building the premier basketball conference, and I think that's where their head's at. I think there's a reason that you hire the commissioner or for someone who has a lot of experience running NBA teams and being with the Nets and having a basketball background, is if you see the writing on the wall for football and you're like, we still want to compete. It's not like we're giving up on football, but maybe we pivot to become the premier basketball conference, which is another revenue sport that could make a lot of money for a lot of these universities and become that. And I mean, if that's the case, I totally get it if the Big 12 were to pivot on that front, because it's also like Big 12 football is fun. Like, there are 7 teams right now that could win the conference this year, and it's an entertaining product. It's a fun product. And I think it's just people talk about the doom and gloom of this stuff. It's like, oh, Texas and Oklahoma. It's like Baylor was almost in the college football playoff this past year, and Oklahoma State just being 1 yard short of getting into the playoff. Like, they'll be fine.
yeah.
There's a lot of good football programs, and when people talk about brands, part of what you miss is that if Baylor and Oklahoma State are really, really good and their recruiting is elevated because Oklahoma and Texas are out of their conference and they have more, they have a lot more success, a lot more 10-win seasons, a lot more conference title wins, the state of the program changes. Like, Clemson is now viewed as a big time national brand. This was never the case up until a decade ago. They were solid, but they weren't someone that you thought of as like one of the premier brands, blue blood types of college football. And I think Baylor and Oklahoma State can absolutely jump into that conversation. TCU could jump into that conversation. There are a lot of programs that can win a lot of games and become premier brands in this conference without Texas and Oklahoma. So I don't like when people talk about the brand, losing that brand stuff. I'm like, someone's going to rise. Like, yes, these don't
Yeah.
look sexy now, but if you get 3 or 4 playoff appearances by one of these programs who've just been really good but have hit these walls for a long period of time, we're going to see them completely differently. We're going to look at them as like, oh, they were always close. Now they're like a possibility of winning a national title. And that can happen when you open it up like this.
Without a doubt, like pre 2015, like, you could easily argue that Oklahoma State was a better program than Clemson. There are at least like 2 programs that are like right there together. So I think Oklahoma State, they feel like the biggest brand like left in the Big 12, but also like these best of the rest they're getting to join the conference. Like, I feel like Memphis fits in with those with Houston and UCF and Cincinnati and BYU. Like, together that can create a pretty solid conference. Like, that's who TCU was basically 10, 12 years ago. They were the best of the rest, and then the Big 12 picked them up. So, and TCU is another program that's we kind of forget about. That's like, they're in a big market in Texas. Like, Texas leaving the Big 12 could definitely open things up for them as well. So I really, there's just not that many like legitimate brands left. Like, if we're trying to go to 4 16-team conferences, like the Big 12 losing Texas, Oklahoma, gaming these 4, like, that's going to put them at 12. Like, how do you get to 4 more? Like, I don't know. like who do you like? Does App State get picked up by the ACC or something? Coastal Carolina, like are they big time enough? Like
I don't think the ACC is adding. I think because their grant rights deal and because there's so much uncertainty on that front and who's trying to jump ship and like the legal questions, I don't think the ACC is adding. I think because their TV deal is locked up for a while, because there's uncertainty about what the biggest brands in the conference want to do, I don't think the ACC is adding. I think they're stuck.
I mean, 14 is still a big conference.
Right.
It's not necessarily like you necessarily have to do something.
I think they're kind of sitting ducks. I think they're healthy and fine for 10 years, but I think they're sitting ducks. And I don't know. I don't foresee the ACC adding. But what I do
Go ahead.
I do foresee the Pac-12 and the Big 12 adding as a last-ditch effort. So I think we're going to see like San Diego State and Boise wind up in the Pac-12. I think we're going to see
Fresno State or someone like that.
Right. And then I think we're going to see the Big 12 add Memphis, maybe South Florida, maybe who else are we missing? Maybe Colorado State. I don't know. SMU, who people forget.
SMU is probably a candidate, for sure.
The Pony Express, like people forget they were a premier big time program. And I mean, maybe one of the academies gets added.
Maybe the Raging Cajuns. Maybe Louisiana can get in there.
I don't think they touch the Sun Belt, man. And leave my Fun Belt alone. I'm really excited for the Fun Belt, and I want that perfect conference. And let me just say, the Sun Belt's perfect. It has a bunch of FCS legends now in this conference. They are fun. They all play the most exciting brand of football. So if you're watching Marshall or Coastal, like Coastal's the most fun watch, I think, on this of anyone. Jimmy Chadwell just does amazing work with his option pass stuff and just wheel routes out of like the wing tee. Like everything Coastal does is extremely fun and cool. So very pro Chanticleers on this podcast, but no, protect the Sun Belt at all costs. I don't think they're doing anything.
Fair enough. I'll leave the Sun Belt alone. But now that we break it down in that way, it feels like Notre Dame to the ACC is the move. Right? Like they're already in there with all the other with all their other sports. And if
they might lose money in that situation.
But if the Big 10 is already at 16, SEC's at 16, ACC's sitting here at 14 right now. Notre Dame is like, that's what would solidify the ACC as a power conference that's not going anywhere. I feel like that's like the one more good, like you talk about Miami, Clemson. Now, then Notre Dame, it's hard to throw in Florida State these days, but Florida State, maybe Virginia Tech, like there's some solid tradition there. NC State, quarterback like there's some solid traditions there in the ACC. I think Notre Dame is like that last heavyweight that they've been missing basically the entire, whether it's Florida State's run or Clemson's run. It's like there's very rarely that second team. Clemson was kind of coming on near the end of, when Florida State was winning the national championship and getting to the playoff and everything. Like Clemson was emerging, but they weren't necessarily like a 2-power team conference. Like even though Texas hasn't been good in a while, the Big 12 is at least like has those 2-power brands with Texas, Oklahoma. Like the Big 10 at least has Ohio State and Michigan, and Penn State would probably make a claim too as being like a power brand like that. But I think Notre Dame is really what would solidify the ACC. I just hate the idea of them in the Atlantic Coast Conference, but I'm a geography guy, so who knows? That could be what's doing it for me.
I would like it too. I just don't think it's going to happen. Like I would love, because it would like you said, it would solidify the 5 conferences. I think that would keep a lot of this for at least a while. I think that would be something where that's the lifeline for the ACC. But that's Notre Dame doing a tremendous solid to both college football fans, and the ACC when they don't have to do that. They just have all the leverage. Like they would be doing the ACC a gigantic solid by doing something like that. And I don't know. It just seems unlikely that they would pass up the Big 10 contract and the revenue that they would get by joining the Big 10 for the ACC.
Maybe it'll be NBC's they're going to flex to try to make it happen. The ESPN's going to have the SEC, Fox is going to have the Big 10, the NBC they'll try to jump in, snag the ACC, get Notre Dame in there.
The Peacock app.
All the games would be on the Peacock. I think we're on to something. The Amazon will probably pick up the Big 12 or something. I don't know. I think we're on to something here.
I mean, that's coming. Like the NFL Sunday Ticket's moving to one of the streamers, and you already got Thursday Night Football on Amazon. I'm certain that it's coming for college football at some point. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited because it seems like the Big 12 and the Pac 12 are next up, and it'll be the small schools kind of getting rated a little bit to beef up the Pac 12 and the Big 12. But I'm excited because ultimately, the longer we can keep the five conference model, the happier I think we all are. I still think there's impending doom a little bit of the super conferences, especially when you listen to Saban this week on the podcast. But hey, if you can put it off till I'm 45, let's go. Let's do this. Let's put this thing off until as long as humanly possible. I'm here for it.
So right now, gun to your head, Big 12's got to get to 16. Who are the four teams they go with?
Memphis, SMU, South Florida, UConn. Yeah.
So they're really going to go all in on this basketball.
It's the basketball. I'm telling you, I think that's part of it.
I like that answer. I feel like UConn does more than I'm still thinking geography. I'm trying
good
to
at baseball too, by the way.
Are we going Tulane or are we going Tulsa?
I just don't think they move the needle. No,
but they don't. UConn, that's a good call.
Yeah, I think UConn finds their way into the Big 12. I'll say that, and that's going to shock some people. But I think
South
they find
Florida,
their way.
Central Florida, nice little Big 12. Your classic Big 12 matchup.
Matt Grothy years, they felt like a Big 12 team a little bit. Peak South Florida. What was his name? The quarterback who was really fun for a couple of years. Flowers. Quentin Flowers, was that it?
That sounds right.
Yeah, he was fun. Yeah, no, they've had their fun run and gun years down there in Tampa, and I think they're building a new stadium, so they just got that approved. So there's more money pumping in there. Jeff Scott trying to get that thing moving off the ground, but yeah, the Bulls. I think those are my four.
Play at the Trop. It's the worst baseball stadium I've ever seen. So turn into a cool indoor football stadium.
There you go. Your thoughts?
And then move the Rays to Canada or something. I don't know.
I mean, that might
Puerto Rico, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what the Rays are doing.
I think that might be a little bit of a travel issue for teams to come in and out of Puerto Rico all the time. Thoughts on the blue chip ratio from friend of the pod, Bud Elliott? Because, I don't know if you've heard this or not, Matt Green, but without being in that above 50% threshold for blue chippers, you are not going to win the national championship. We can go ahead and write that one in. This year we have, how many was it total that made this list?
15.
Yeah. And there's some surprises on this list. We've got, and I'm doing this in order of the most blue chippers over the last four classes. Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Texas, LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, Miami, and Auburn. Your thoughts, Matt Green?
Well, I think when we go just the way we approach college football, I think most people don't think there's even 15 teams that can win a national championship, right? It's just such a top-heavy sport. But just the premise being like, this is the bare minimum. Like, this is the prerequisite for even thinking you can win a national championship. And I like, there's obviously a couple teams on there that you're like, Florida, Auburn, they have no chance of winning a national championship. Like, it's not going to happen. Even like an Oregon, like that would just be absolutely shocking if they won the national championship this year. But you just have to have the prerequisite talent to even be in the conversation. So I think that's why there's certain teams like a Cincinnati. They weren't on this list a year ago, and yeah, they were a good story. They were in the playoff, but you just knew they didn't have the talent to win it all. And you go into this season like, who's a candidate out there that, they think, they're a dark horse, but are you a dark horse? Like Utah, NC State, maybe even a Tennessee, like USC, maybe even. It's like, yeah, all those teams are confident that their team should be good and they might start around the top 10 or so, but at the end of the day, you just have to have the talent. And that's why most of those teams, a Rose Bowl bid is about as good as they can ask for. An Orange Bowl bid, a Sugar Bowl, like something like that. It's just a New Year's Six Bowl in general. Like, you just have to, like Bud Elliott says, like I think he went back to 2011 with teams having at least 50% blue chip. Every single team that's won the national championship has had at least 50% blue chip ratio. So, yeah, I couldn't really disagree with this list. And it's obviously like 15. It's obviously not even really that many teams.
Well, I think this is why Florida and Auburn have popped up as like, hey, they might be better than you expected, where you see Auburn in the top 10 in FPI and you see like Vegas hedging on Florida finishing number 2 in the East. This is why, like, even though we have questions about the staff or the schedule or the turnover or whatever, like, these are still pretty solid situations that Malzahn left and Dan Mullen left. This is still a lot of talent. This is still a lot of holdovers from previous classes. Like, joke all you want about Mullen and Malzahn, but they were still winning a lot of football games, and they still accumulated a lot of blue chippers in that run. And this Florida team was one of the 5-6 best teams in college football 2 years ago. So I understand, like, that's something to monitor. Are the teams who are like, oh, they're going to be blah? LSU, Florida, Auburn, and I think even Oregon to an extent. You talk about like they can't win a national title this year, but like them just winning the Pac-12 in year 1 of Dan Lanning would not be surprising. Like them being in the college football playoff would not be all that surprising at all. I don't know though. Has there ever been a first-year head coach that's won a national title? I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind. Has there been one?
I know Malzahn was. I want to say Malzahn was year 1 when they
but
went
he
to the national
he didn't win
championship.
though.
They didn't win at all. I don't put me on the spot. I don't think there is. I'm a big second-year head coach guy.
Yeah,
a lot of coaches have done in the second year, but I don't think anyone's ever. I think what's his name? Miami. Larry Coker may have been year 1.
Larry Coker's a good call.
But that may not have been year 1. I'll have to look at that because I know who's it, Butch Davis, that kind of built them back up and then bounced for the Browns.
Yes.
So that may not have been year 1. 2000 could have been year 1 of Coker, but
2001 it looks like was year 1 of Coker.
That was his first year. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, no, he won the Rose. Yeah, 12-0. He won his first year.
Okay, nice. But yeah, and I think that's why these certain brands have a certain expectation, because Auburn looks at their team finishing with a losing record, and it's like Florida looks at their team finishing with a losing record. Like, we have the talent to not have a losing record. Like, that's why this is so unacceptable to do it somewhere like here. And that's what's crazy. Like, Dan Mullen, like we all love to poke fun at Dan Mullen and talk about how poorly they did in recruiting. But that's why everything in college football is just so relative. Yeah, he was a terrible recruiter. He was signing the 10th best class in the country basically every year, right? Like the 12th best class in the country, but that's 6th or 7th in the SEC, and he's nowhere near really competing for the conference on an annual basis. So I obviously don't think Auburn and Florida are going to be there at the end of the year, but I think they have more talent than someone like a Utah, or even Tennessee was probably the team I was kind of surprised to see not on this list, but we might still be a year or two early for them truly having like the blue chip ratio on their roster. Like, they're moving in the right direction, and I think like it's probably only a year away till they are on this list, the way they've been recruiting the last month or so.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some flips. I mean, Tennessee will be here in a year. I think that's coming. But, they're not expecting to win a national title just yet. This is, you just keep building and you try and get there. It's a process. It is a process. But last thing before...
Oh, sorry. Last thing. USC is definitely going to be on this list next year. And I think the most damning one not to be on here is Florida State. Because, like, you look at Texas...
Wait, hold on. They're more damning than USC?
Kind of. Like, USC, it's been a while since USC was like truly, like, obviously they have the whole West Coast at their disposal.
I was going to say, like, Matt, they have the advantages, Southern California.
But Texas has been, like, Florida State's been there just like Texas. Like, they might not be winning games like they should, but they've still been in the top 5, top 10 in the recruiting rankings. Now, like, the last couple of years, you're not even seeing Florida State up there in the recruiting rankings. So
Travis Hunter not picking Florida State was just like that halted all kinds of momentum. That swerve at the last minute, and it's no fault to Hunter. He goes like, go wherever you think is best. Sure. But like, that was a brutal, devastating day for Florida State football.
Without a doubt. And you look right this past week. Raylan Wilson, that dude, I hyped him up a few months ago. The guy I wanted, Michigan commit. He since decommitted from Michigan a couple days ago, committed to Georgia. Like, this guy's from Lincoln High School in Tallahassee. He was a Michigan commit. Now he's going to Georgia. Like, he didn't even consider going to Florida State. This is a top 50 player in the country, top 5 linebacker. Like, Florida State's just fallen hard. And it's like, even though they were always there, they always had the talent, even if they were, something was going wrong. Like, and that's how I kind of compare them to Texas. It's like, now they don't even have the talent. Like, it's kind of crazy to see. And now Miami appears to be unseating them, I guess, if you will. So yeah, I'm kind of blown away by seeing Florida State. Like, as two people who grew up in the 90s, 2000s, like, what we have used to Florida State football, it's kind of bizarre to me. Like, USC is a great tradition, but they were only really truly elite for that kind of like 5-6 year period there in the early 2000s. Like, they kind of fell off a little after Pete Carroll. Like, Florida State is just crazy not seeing them even on the list.
Matt Green, Penn State, do they pose the biggest threat to upset Ohio State this year? Brandon Marcello of 24/7 Sports wrote an article about this. I'm a big Penn State guy on this podcast, big Penn State truther when it comes to James Franklin and that bunch and the talent that they're bringing in. And we should also mention they are in the blue chip ratio for this season. Good recruiter, good team. And the point he made is that, like, Clifford doesn't get hurt last year, they probably win 10 games. And we have a completely different perspective on what Penn State's looking like going into this year. They've had a really weird bad luck situation the last couple of years in Happy Valley. And I think it's kind of clouded where the program has been, where it's going under Franklin and how sturdy things are. He's got like 19 years left on his contract with all of his extensions when he gets poached by insert next big Power 5 job opening. But there's a reason that everybody wants James Franklin. There's a reason that there are calls made to Franklin's agent about, like, hey, how happy is he in Happy Valley? And it's because he is a really good coach, and he is someone that has a really good, the program is really, really good. So when we talk about Michigan State or even Iowa or that Purdue or who could pose the biggest threat, but it's like Joey Porter's back, Sean Clifford's back, and a healthy Sean Clifford, even with Jahan Dotson leaving, you bring in a big-time receiver transfer in with Mitchell Tinsley, who, as we both know, lit it up for the Hilltoppers last year, and Bailey Zappi in that high-octane passing offense. That this should be a good offense. It's year 2 with Mike Yurcich, who came over, longtime offensive coordinator at both Ohio State and Oklahoma State, but a lot of people remember him from Oklahoma State. And so you get year 2 for him. So it's the same system for Sean Clifford in this offense. So they get more used to that. They were able to keep Poindexter as their DC. He doesn't get the Virginia job. He stays in-house. Brent Pry goes to Virginia Tech. A lot of returning guys. I think 7 guys on offense are back. I'm okay with this. Penn State always plays Ohio State tough. That's always a trap game for Ohio State. And a lot of people have circled like Purdue being the trap game for Ohio State. But I think Penn State's going to give them a game, and I think Penn State's going to be really good this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that pick for sure. And just like going back and looking at their 2021 season, like you said, I don't know if you said snake bit or just bad luck, but it totally was. Like, they were just a scrappy team that was winning with defense early on. Like, I feel like they seem like that kind of team that's like, you're kind of learning to win as the season goes along. Like that win against Wisconsin, like that was just a great football game, honestly, just to open up the season. And then, to beat Auburn the way they did. And then you had Clifford go down versus Iowa. Like, they lose to Iowa by 3, lose to Illinois. And I don't know if that was the first overtime game in college football, but that was the first one I remember watching with this new overtime rules. And it's like, what a garbage way to lose a football game with this 2-point conversion contest. Like, so like 7-6, like, do bowl games matter anymore? I don't know how many people were sitting out for the bowl game. I almost want to throw that out. So you got 7-5, 4 of those losses are by 4 points or less. Like, and you played Ohio State at Ohio State. So 4 points, 4 of the losses are by 4 points or less. And the other one is to Ohio State. So like, at Ohio State as well. And they all, I think, was a 9-point loss, something like that. So I think they're definitely a team. You put Sean Clifford back in this lineup and he's healthy, I think things are completely different. And I think clearly the administration at Penn State is not scared off by the last 2 years and all the bad luck they've had, because they are 100% committed to James Franklin, and they put their money where their mouth is. So I don't hate that at all. I think Ohio State is just so good this year. But I mean, if you're going to find someone that can beat them and it's at Penn State, Ohio State's going to play at Penn State this year. I think that's a good pick.
Hey, we'll see. We'll see. Sean Clifford has to stay healthy, though. I think that's just imperative. Like, you got to keep him upright this year. So
I think
we shall
going
see.
at Auburn early too, like that's a good measuring stick game. Like Auburn is obviously, their season is not going to be over when Penn State comes to town, right? However negative you could be as an Auburn fan, like they're going to have all the hype, all the hopes in the world week 2, week 3, whenever that is, when Penn State comes in. Like, Jordan Hare is going to be absolutely rocking. So if you can get past a game like that in a hostile environment early in the year, I kind of compare it to like maybe like a Georgia going at Notre Dame in 2017. Like Notre Dame wasn't the best team in the country or anything, but it's just like an early measuring stick game that if you can get through this hostile environment, like you're not going to have many more. You're probably not going to go into another environment as loud as Jordan Hare the rest of the season. So I think that's one that's going to be an awesome non-conference game early on. Hopefully Auburn doesn't get some garbage targeting ejections in that one.
Well, that's another thing. Is like that would be interesting too. If like they flip it where both road teams win this home and home, that'd be wild. You don't see that very often. These Power 5 home and homes where the away team wins both games. That's a rarity.
That's a good point.
But we'll see. We shall see. Matt Green, we have a leading topic tonight. Our head coach power rankings. But next week we're going to get into our season preview over under win totals for the group of 5 and then Power 5. But because the college football season, it's right around the corner, Matt. We're going to start here with our head coach power rankings. We did 1 through 10, and then we have some honorable mentions and not listed. And then a couple of guys who we think could join the top 10 after this season. You go first, though. Who's your 1 through 10?
So at 1, I got Nick Saban. Just gotta put the GOAT out there. 2, I'm going Kirby Smart. 3, Dabo Swinney. 4, Brian Kelly. 5, Jimbo Fisher. 6, Luke Fickell. 7, Jim Harbaugh. 8, Lincoln Riley. 9, Mike Gundy. And 10, Kyle Whittingham. What is your list? You want to talk about my list? You want to say your list first?
Well, let's say my list, and then we can break down who we left off, because Luke Fickell is an interesting one. For me, I had Saban 1, Dabo 2, Brian Kelly 3, Kirby 4, Jimbo 5, Lincoln Riley 6, Mike Gundy 7, Kyle Whittingham 8, Ryan Day 9, and Kirk Ferentz 10.
So right off the bat, I mean, we got to start at the top here. How is Brian Kelly ahead of Kirby Smart?
Okay, so Brian Kelly, I have ahead of Kirby Smart at the moment because I think getting to the college football playoff multiple times, getting to the national title with getting to the playoff post BCS, getting to the BCS championship game with Notre Dame, 2 appearances, that's huge. 3 total, I guess.
Essentially 3, appearances.
That's huge at Notre Dame, and we like to make it seem like that's just this easy feat. And you go through the track record of Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, at Cincinnati. Kirby's track record is still just Georgia, and he's done a great job. He won a national title. That's great. He's recruited really well. He's become a lot better of a CEO than any of us. I think even Georgia fans would have expected that he'd be this good of a CEO type coach this early. There's a lot of credit, and I think you could sell me. It's not like I'm completely tied to Brian Kelly over Kirby. I just think Brian Kelly, and it's kind of like the argument with Urban Meyer, where Urban won at Bowling Green, Urban won at Utah, Urban won at Florida, Urban won at Ohio State. Like, you just put him anywhere, he's going to win. And I think that's the case with Brian Kelly. I think he's kind of like the modern Urban Meyer to me. And I think that's not talked about enough yet. And there's a Notre Dame connection already there and some weirdness with their personality traits and that sort of thing. But the guys just win. Like they're very cringy at times, but you just know they're probably going to win a national title, whichever Power 5 job they take. And the last 3 head coaches have won national titles at LSU. He's already putting on a recruiting clinic in Baton Rouge, and it seems likely that he gets a ring in the next couple of years. Kirby's got one, but I think getting Notre Dame to 2 playoff appearances, getting him to the BCS national title game, regardless of what happened against Alabama, most teams are getting sloshed by Alabama. So it's like, all right, man, like if we're just looking at Brian Kelly's job acumen based on how he performed against Alabama or Clemson or whoever in the biggest games of the year, he played Georgia close. He also played Kirby Smart extremely close, both at Notre Dame and in Athens. It wasn't like those games were blowouts and Kirby just blew out Notre Dame in both their head-to-heads. They were super close, and Georgia had the talent advantage. And
both of those games ended with Notre Dame's offense on the field with a chance to win the game,
right?
A drive to win the game.
So I think it comes down to me being like, I think there's just more data on Brian Kelly being able to win anywhere than Kirby being able to win everywhere. I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying that Kelly is like the modern Urban Meyer where he can win anywhere and win national titles with any Power 5 job.
That's fair. And just the sustained success that they've had at Notre Dame for the last, basically decade, I think is big time. There's only like 1 or 2 real like down years in there for Brian Kelly. So I think all that's fair. But at the end of the day, he's 0-2 against curves. And I think did Georgia really have the talent advantage in 2017 over Notre Dame? Was it really that?
I mean, you had more talent, yeah. Like they're
playing with their backup quarterback, making his first career start as well, a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
So Georgia had a lot going against him. That's all I'm saying. But regardless, I had Brian Kelly 1 spot, or I think I had Dabo 1 spot behind Kirby. But
here's another thing. So I had even mentioned Grand Valley. So he went 118-35. He went 13-1, 14-0, 14-1 in those last 3 years there. And then he gets to 9-4 his last year at Central Michigan. He goes 10-3, 11-3, 12-0, 34-6 overall at Cincinnati. And then 8-4, the vacated wins in 2012 and 2013. I don't know what that is I don't know what, we'd have to go back and look to see how those games ended. But 10 wins 4 times his last 3 years, 10 wins, 12 wins, 11 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins. Like the dude literally just reeled off 5 straight double-digit win seasons at Notre Dame, and they were a perennial college football contender and made it in multiple times. The dude won everywhere, and at 60 years old, man, the guy has literally never
punish Kirby for just getting the dream job right.
I'm not punishing him. Right? I'm saying
he's not going to win anywhere else. He's going to be at Georgia.
Well, that's my point though, is that like I'm not holding it against Kirby. I'm just saying that when you're comparing the two and when you're having to what's the term? Split hairs, I'm giving the tie to the guy who won everywhere and at tougher spots. Like I'm just going to do that.
I think that's fair. Kind of like the other Rick Pitino or somebody who won at multiple spots is definitely always impressive. Like you said, Urban Meyer. The other one I wish I hadn't seen your list before I started making my list, because I'm not sure I would have included Mike Gundy in my top 10, but then I saw him on your list and I was like, I gotta throw Gundy in there. So I had Gundy at 9. I had Lincoln Riley down at 8. And I need to see more from Lincoln Riley. Like I'm aware that before he actually became the head coach at Oklahoma, he did have a strong influence on the offense the last couple of years under Stoops. But he just he never elevated Oklahoma. Like Oklahoma was exactly as good the day Lincoln Riley left as they were the day he got there. And I think that's a flaw to me for Lincoln Riley. Like obviously it takes being really good to keep a team perennially top 5, top 6. And that's basically what he did until obviously this past year. But I think that definitely hurts Lincoln Riley. Like, I almost didn't put him in my top 10, but I feel like he's got a longer track record than Ryan Day. Like, I can't put Ryan Day in there. Like, the only other program that is remotely close to what Alabama has done, just with the talent, just the pro factory that they are, is Ohio State. And Ryan Day just walked right into that. Urban Meyer, we talked about, like, one of the greatest coaches in college football history, like one of the best recruiters we've ever seen. Like, he just built Ohio State into just this pro factory. Not that they weren't a pro factory before he took over, but Ohio State is just the elite of the elite. And I don't feel like Ryan Day, like, he's won the one college football playoff game. Like, he's gotten to a national championship, but, like, let's not forget, he also got to the national championship on a year they went, like, 5-0, 6-0. Like, just about every year. 2019, they made it all the way through the regular season without a loss. But just about every year, Ohio State inexplicably loses a game to someone they shouldn't, someone they're way more talented than. It was more of a thing under Urban Meyer than it has been at Ryan Day. Like, I mean, he lost to Oregon, he lost to Michigan this past year. Not that those were bad teams, but they obviously weren't as talented as Ohio State. Like, so I just, with the Jim Harbaugh quote says it all, right? Some people think they start on third base, or some people start on third base and think they hit a home run. Like, that's just how I feel with Ryan Day. Like, this program is just so elite. He has not elevated them to a level that they weren't at before he took over. And I can't put a guy in the top 10 after 3 years as a head coach, 2.5 years as a head coach.
I think the reason I put him in, and I just have to include him, and I put him at 9, is just that, like, there are scenarios where we've seen the guy who just gets promoted from within go south, right? Where it just, he handed him the keys. He was unproven. Like, Ryan Day could have absolutely imploded and not been a good game day coach.
Mark Helfrich is a name that comes to mind.
That's a good example. That's what I'm saying. So we kind of I don't want to take for granted Ryan Day has kept this thing moving. And he's clearly a great offensive mind. Clearly, like, he's kind of in that Lincoln Riley mode, right? Where we're still waiting and seeing with everything else. But, I mean, there's a case that Ryan Day is a better all-around CEO and head coach than Lincoln Riley. I think there is an absolute possibility that's the case.
I think that's true.
So I don't know. I think he has to be included somewhere in the top 10. I think like we've talked about with Kirby, where he's kind of the victim of just, you were expecting college football playoff results for Ohio State and for Georgia, but it's the same thing of, like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, he's in there, they're in the conversation year over year. This is probably a gigantic year for him in a lot of these narratives, because this is the most talented team he's had to this point, and they are really, outside of Bama, like, they're the favorites. I think you could even say they're probably the favorites to win the national title this year.
I think they're more the favorites because there's no doubt. Oh, obviously, you got to play the games on the field, but to most people, there's no doubt they're getting through the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. Like, as good as Alabama is and should be, like, they're still like, well, A&M's a dark horse. LSU got Brian Kelly. There's obviously Georgia coming out of the East, so there's just so much more competition coming out of the SEC that it feels like this is Ohio State's year for sure to be the betting favorite.
I have Dabo still at 2, and I think I would have had him lower if he didn't pivot like he has this summer. Dabo's pivoted, man. He's on a recruiting clinic. He's entered the portal. He is he's betting on his in-house coordinators getting the bump. They're put in the playoff. Like, everyone's expecting Clemson to make the playoff this year. I think Dabo, until he doesn't win double-digit games at Clemson again, and before they come back down to earth, I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt, and he's still a top 4 or 5 coach in this sport. I can't shake. Dabo was, like, universally declared number 2 to Saban in this sport for years. And he really hasn't done anything.
Almost tried to throw a 1B in there. Like he was that close to Saban. He was never that close to Saban.
Well, I think part of that was because they were like, well, he's the obvious guy to replace Saban. So it's like, he's the Saban in waiting. And I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he's going to be the guy. I don't know why anyone would want to follow Saban. I think he got a good day at Clemson. If he can win at Clemson, just stay at Clemson.
I think he gets a second quarterback. I think because everyone, I subscribe to the narrative a little bit, but I also feel like it's an overblown narrative. Like, he got Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, and that's the only reason he's so good. It's like, Well, yeah, but he got Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. Like that's something he accomplished.
Right.
It's like the people that talk about all the talent on Georgia's roster and don't want to talk about, well, yeah, Kirby Smart's a great recruiter. He's the reason all that talent is there. Like, so you can't discredit him for having these two basically generational type quarterbacks. It's obviously not generational if they're like back to back, but you get the idea. DJ Uyunglele, like we have to see some serious improvement to for them to be a legitimate playoff contender. Like if he plays the way he played last year, like there's no way they're like, yeah, maybe they go to the playoff. Kelly Bryant wasn't elite, but there's no way they're winning the national championship with DJ Uyunglele not improving significantly. So if we get through him, and then I'm blanking on this next guy, the 5-star. Help me out. This freshman coming in for Clemson.
Klubnik. Or are you talking about the guy who's this year, Corey Klubnik?
Yeah, who could potentially unseat Uyunglele.
Yes,
like
Klubnik.
If that happens. Like if we get through like two quarterbacks post Trevor Lawrence and they're still like not elite and they're like a 9-3, 10-3 with a bowl game type team. Okay, then I think you can start to say maybe Dabo just got lucky with some transcendent talents like quarterback. But to this point, he's got 2 national championships. I think that's just the ultimate flex. It's like no one else has multiple national championships. So you have to put him up there. I may be biased as a Georgia fan, but it feels like Georgia and Clemson are almost 2 ships passing in the night, right? Like Clemson was here at the top of the mountaintop. It feels like that time is over because they're not a blue blood, and we've seen the chink in the armor, and we're like, oh yeah, we all knew this had to end eventually. Clemson's just not a powerhouse like this all the time. So I'm curious to see how Dabo bounces back from this, but like I can't put him any lower than 3.
You know what's interesting? I think it was Brandon Joseph on 680 The Fan last week, maybe, had this nugget that I thought was super interesting, was that the last two, like, so Deshaun Watson took over as a freshman, went to the college football playoff, took over for an incumbent guy who was not
his freshman year, though.
Was he not a freshman?
No, because his freshman year was when they played Georgia in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
The Todd Gurley game, you might as well call it.
Yeah.
And so Cole Stout was
right
because Watson, I remember, got a couple drives in that game.
Yeah.
But by the time they went to him in the fourth, like they were kind of getting blown out.
But was he the starter by the end of the year, though?
I think, yeah, like halfway through, I think.
That's what I'm saying. So he went in at some point. Like he took over. He was not the guy immediately, but then he took over. And then Trevor Lawrence did not start he did not start as a true freshman right out of the gate. But that year he took over. And there is a precedent that DJ Uyunglele will not be the starter by the end of the year. So their last 2 iconic quarterbacks, and Cade Klubnik is a 99% 247 sport composite guy, like 99, number 1 in the state of Texas, 6 nationally. I mean, Cade Klubnik is a dude, and I mean, it would not be all that surprising if DJ, I mean, it did come out this week that he dropped like 20 something pounds to make him move around in the pocket better, I guess. But I don't think it's there. I think it's a Spencer Rattler situation with DJ, where I think the fans are already kind of getting antsy, and they're going to be like, we're ready for Cade, kind of like with Caleb Williams. And I think I do think that Cade Klubnik will be the guy by the end of the season, and DJ will be quarterbacking somewhere else in the Southeast. I just don't know where next year.
Probably, and I almost compare him to like an Anthony Richardson. It's like both didn't play very well last year, but Anthony Richardson showed signs, right? He had those moments. They're like, okay, this guy's got talent. Like he's got to put it all together. He's made some bad decisions, threw a lot of picks, but you see the talent. Like I saw the talent in 2020 when Uyunglele played when Trevor Lawrence was out a couple times, but I just didn't see anything encouraging in 2021 that would make you think like he's gonna take another step in 2022. Like someone like Anthony Richardson, I feel like while he was underwhelming, I can at least see what success looks like, and I just don't really see it for DJ.
Yeah, I don't either, but we shall see. We shall see. I think we can get to this point where I think is super interesting. So I have Kirk Ferentz, you have Jim
That's what I was
Harbaugh.
about to bring out.
I think
Kirk
this is
Ferentz.
a good back and forth because it is how you see the two programs, two Big Ten programs that are in great standing. Iowa, obviously, in the Big Ten title game this past year, they get bounced by Jim Harbaugh's team in really, really rough fashion. Iowa was number 2 in the country at one point last year, Matt Green. Iowa, I just think if anyone other than Kirk Ferentz, who's the longest tenured, I think, FBS coach right now, I'm pretty sure it is Kirk Ferentz, at least
It's
in the
gotta
power.
be
Yeah. The dude,
99.
that man has just won at a school where winning like this would not happen with just about any other coach. Like, I love some Matt Campbell. And if you're one of these two guys, I think Kirk Ferentz just belongs. Like, he just went to another Big Ten title game. Like, he's just death taxes. Like, my offenses are never going to evolve. They're never going to be fun to watch. I'm still going to sign like this 5-star offensive tackle that he just signed, and we're still going to be huge. I'm going to put tight ends in the NFL like Dallas Clark. I'm going to put together a top 5 defense. We're going to play ground and pound.
No, not just Dallas Clark. Noah Fant.
Noah Fant.
What's a Hawkinson? TJ
Yeah, TJ
Hawkinson. Like, that
Hawkinson.
was 2 first-rounders on one team.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, Kirk Ferentz has done more with less than, I mean, look, I love Jim Harbaugh. I think it's just hard to do this list, man, because I just feel like it's so difficult to win at Iowa, and for him to just pull off number 2 in the country with Iowa this past year is just insane. They were Georgia North for a while for this season, where the takeaways and what they were doing defensively was just preposterous. And I think Kirk Ferentz, when you're doing a list, it's kind of like he's the new Bill Snyder, where I don't know how anyone could do a top 10 list during Bill Snyder's heyday and not include him, because like what he did at Kansas State is insane. Like, we've seen post Bill Snyder Kansas State teams and like what that looked like for the majority, and it's just not the same. I think Kirk Ferentz is a top 10 coach. I can't escape that.
I think you got a lot of data to support it, to be fair. Because the term less with more is one of the more overused terms by all college football fans. Like, this guy does less with more. Like, how many times you hear Dabo does less with more, Lincoln Riley does less with more. Like, yeah, these guys they weren't number 1 in recruiting rankings, but they were always the most talented team in the conference, and they blew through that conference. Like, Kirk Ferentz is a true I said less with more. Doing more with less. Reverse that. Kirk Ferentz is truly one of those doing more with less than just about anyone else. Like, if anyone questions him ever, like, he should just hold up a picture of Bo Pelini. Like, is this what you guys want to do? You guys want to be Nebraska? Like, just let me do my thing. We'll win 8-9 games every single year, and we might even win 10 or 11 here and there. So make a couple Big Ten championships. So yeah, I can't hate on Kirk Ferentz at all.
Can I give you a great what if with Kirk Ferentz?
That?
So do you know who went to Iowa and was a favorite to land the Iowa head coaching job once their legendary coach retired? Hayden Fry.
Back in 99?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. Who was it?
Bob Stoops, who ultimately chose against his alma mater and became the head coach at OU. There is a complete, like, how can you imagine college football if it's not Kirk Ferentz and Bob Stoops goes home and coaches the Hawkeyes instead? Like, Oklahoma obviously wins a national title not long after that. Heupel.
I mean, that's another year 2 national championship guy.
Exactly. And he could have gone to Iowa and never won a national title.
But I mean, Oklahoma, like, they're obviously like a blue blood, like they're way more tradition than an Iowa. But
hold on, don't do this.
They're going on some bad years in the 90s. Like, Bob Stoops brought Oklahoma back, so he could have brought Iowa all the way. Who's to say?
History? Iowa never winning a national title? Is that enough?
I'm just saying, Bob Stoops, man, like that. He was a big time coach. Like, look at Oklahoma. What were they before Bob Stoops?
Do we need to go to the Barry Switzer years? Oklahoma's been a what?
Oh, what? You gotta. We're Barry Switzer. That's years ago, though. Like,
but I'm saying there is a history. There is a long 100-year track record that Oklahoma football can win national titles.
3
There's
years
no
before
track
Bob
record for
Stoops
Iowa.
got there. 3-8, 4-8, 5-6.
Oh my God.
As well, honestly, keep going. 2 years before that, 5-1, 6-6. Like
mm-hmm.
it was a solid decade after Barry Switzer left.
They're 909 and 327 overall.
No, they're
they won the
definitely
conference 50 times.
They're one of the powerhouses, but in the 90s, that was not the program Bob Stoops took over. Like, if he goes to Iowa, who's to say Iowa isn't the same powerhouse that Oklahoma was in the early 2000s?
I'm going to be sick.
I mean, you've seen that Iowa is a good team. Like, Bob Stoops is clearly a better coach than Kirk Ferentz. I don't think anyone would ever argue that.
They lost. So, Bud Wilkinson from 1947 to 19...
that's ancient history, sir.
The dude never lost. You go through this with the big, like, they just never lost. And you go through all these Chuck Fairbanks, Barry Switzer. You're talking about the
absurd.
Gary Gibbs
You go
year.
like 71 to 80. They lost 2 games 3 times and never lost more than that for like a decade.
I can't believe we're going down this rabbit hole of comparing Iowa's history to Oklahoma and their pedigree.
It's obviously better, but I'm saying Bob Stoops is a huge reason why Oklahoma's history and perception and prestige is what it is. Like he was an institution for close to 20 years for Oklahoma.
I mean, I love Bob Stoops. I'm not going against him. I'm just saying Bob Stoops does not have the same success at Iowa. There's no way.
That's fair. That is a fun fact, and I can't believe he turned on his alma mater like that.
It's hard, but he made the right choice.
No, that's fair. So Kirk Ferentz, I can't hate on you throwing him in the top 10. I don't feel like he's a top 10. Isn't that like a Stuart Mandel thing? I think it's like a running storyline, I think, with him like every year that like wherever he puts Kirk Ferentz in his top coaches list, that like he just gets berated by Iowa fans on how he's too low. But I think that's pretty typical with anything these days. But I felt like Jim Harbaugh, with what he's done at Michigan, what he's done at Stanford, and the 49ers, not necessarily my pick if I'm making the guys I want to coach my team, not necessarily making the top 10, but Harbaugh is a damn good coach. And at multiple stops, I think he's proven that. And, you know, maybe the brand of Michigan has a higher ceiling than Iowa, but they've competed for a few more conference championships, I think, in his short since Harbaugh got to Michigan. So I'm going Harbaugh there at 7. We both basically have Gundy and Whittingham, giving them some love. I think they're 2 coaches that are a little underrated. I thought you might go Pat Fitzgerald on there because you like to go with the guys that do more with less, but
he's not doing more with less. I don't know if you've been watching Northwestern football the last couple of years. That's not happening right now. He's just doing less with less.
That's fair. But the 2 I was shocked didn't make your top 10. I think Matt Campbell may have been in your top 5 last year. And James Franklin, you obviously kind of already talked about him. But yeah, I know those are 2 guys you're big on.
Franklin's like number 11. He's like the quintessential number 11 for me. Where like he's just going to be outside of it until they make